JD Vance came in ready for a show. He had notes, prep talking points, and just enough smirk to signal he thought this hearing was already in his favour. But what he didn't realise was that Jasmine Crockett had walked in with something more powerful. Lived experience, unshakable calm, and a binder thick with truth. He came to perform. She came prepared. The official topic was housing reform. That's what the papers said. That's what the nameplates read. That's what the cameras framed as the backdrop. But everyone in that room knew better. This wasn't just a policy hearing. It was a battlefield dressed in business suits. And the real question humming beneath every word wasn't about zoning codes or funding formulas. It was about something colder, sharper. Who gets to be seen as competent and who gets quietly disqualified the moment they walk in the door. When Senator JD Vance leaned into his mic, he didn't need to raise his voice. He knew the game. His tone was smooth, calculated, dipped in just enough civility to pass for concern, but sharpened at the edges with something older, something uglier. He wasn't just asking questions about housing budgets. He was signalling to everyone listening that Jasmine Crockett didn't belong at that table. Not really. That people like her, from districts like hers, with constituents like hers, could only be part of the problem, never the solution. He called it mismanagement. He called it systemic failure. But what he meant was, you're the failure, you and your people. And he did it with a smile, with a loosened tie and rehearsed phrasing. Because when that kind of attack wears a suit, it doesn't look like a punch. It looks like policy. But Crockett heard it. Everyone who's ever sat in a room where their intelligence was doubted heard it. Every woman who's been spoken over. Every black leader who's been asked to explain crime statistics like a confession. Every poor person who's been treated like a drain instead of a neighbour. They heard it in that moment. And so did she. She didn't flinch, didn't blink. She didn't meet his condescension with fury. She met it with truth, with stories, with names. She didn't counter his attack with another jab. She built a case. And not just against his question, but against the entire quiet, coded system that allowed him to ask it in the first place. Because this wasn't just about housing. It was about hierarchy. It was about who gets the benefit of the doubt and who gets held responsible for generations of wounds they didn't cause. And Vance, in that moment, wasn't just throwing shade. He was pulling a lever that's been used for decades to keep people like Crockett in their place. Only this time, the lever broke. Because she didn't just answer. She exposed the whole stage for what it was. And you could feel it. The cameras didn't need to zoom in. The silence didn't need a soundtrack. You just knew something had shifted. And there was no turning it back. He didn't shout. He didn't even smirk. He just said it, calm and deliberate, like a man tossing a stone into a pond and pretending he doesn't see the ripple. Cities like yours, JD Vance said, consistently fail their residents. That was it. 7 words, polished with restraint, polished to sound like policy. But make no mistake, it landed like a slap. Not loud, not messy, just cold. It was the kind of statement that doesn't leave a bruise, just leaves the room frozen. He wasn't just talking about numbers. He wasn't really talking about housing. What he said wasn't crafted for answers. It was bait. He wanted her to look defensive, to stumble, to snap. Because underneath that line wasn't a question about federal funding. It was a verdict. He'd already decided. Cities led by black and brown leaders were broken, and it had to be their fault. Not history, not disinvestment, not redlining or decades of extraction. Just them. And there it was, said with all the arrogance of someone who never had to explain why their communities got highways and hospitals, while others got liquor stores and lead pipes. The air in the room didn't break, but it thickened. The cameras caught it. Staffers paused, pens mid-scribble. No one gasped. That would have made it too easy to name. But you could feel the tilt. You could feel the people who knew exactly what had just been said without it needing to be said outright. And in the centre of it all sat Jasmine Crockett, stone still, shoulders straight, eyes locked forward, not flinching, Not flustered, just ready. She didn't react. She responded, and not the way he hoped. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't lean back in disgust. She didn't crack a sarcastic smile. She reached for her mic like she was adjusting the volume of a truth long overdue. And then she looked at him. Really looked. Not the kind of look meant for cameras or Twitter clips. The kind of look you give someone who's finally said what you always knew they believed. Failure, she said. Just that word. Quiet. Clean. A razor tucked in velvet. You mean the consequences of decisions made long before I was elected? She let it hang in the air, like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Let's talk about that. And in that moment, the hearing stopped being a hearing. It became a reckoning. Because what Vance thought would be a one-sided takedown just opened a floodgate. Crockett wasn't just going to defend herself. She was about to dismantle the entire premise of his question, piece by piece, history by policy, data by name. And she wasn't going to do it to impress anyone. She was going to do it because someone had to tell the truth before the lie got too comfortable. The room had turned. He just hadn't realized it yet. She didn't reach for charts. She didn't start with statistics. She started with names. Not numbers. Names. People. The kind of people who never make it into hearing rooms, who don't show up in spreadsheets, who don't get invited to testify or sit behind microphones. But they live the consequences of every policy debated in rooms like this. They carry the weight of every cut, every delay, every lie dressed up as legislation. She said Miss Clara first. No title, no spin, just Miss Clara, an elderly woman in South Oak Cliff who still boils water on a stove to bathe. Not because she wants to, not because she's lazy, but because her building's plumbing hasn't worked in over a year. And the landlord knows no one's coming to inspect. Miss Clara's been calling for help, filling out forms, asking for dignity, and all she's gotten is silence. Crockett said her name like a vow. Like saying it in that room made Miss Clara finally visible. Then she spoke about Elijah, a teenager, a 10th grader. He's not a case file. He's a kid with algebra homework, a kid who's trying to stay on the honour roll while living in the backseat of his mum's car. Not for a night. Not for a week. For months. After their apartment was condemned, after the ceiling fell in, his mother tried shelters, but they were full. She parks near a gas station and makes sure he showers at school. He still turns in his assignments on time. Still shows up to class. Still smiles when his teachers say, "You're doing great, Elijah." Crockett told that story like it was holy. Like every single person in that chamber needed to hear what perseverance actually looks like. And then she said what no one else dared. This is who you're talking about when you say mismanagement. She didn't offer excuses for cities. She didn't sugarcoat broken systems. She didn't deny the problems. But she made one thing clear. These problems weren't born in a vacuum. They were inherited, layered, engineered over time by people with power and protected by people who now pretend to be surprised. Crockett didn't defend her district. She honoured it. She didn't ask for sympathy. She demanded memory, accountability, truth. She painted cities not as failing zones, but as survivors, as places that still rise every morning despite the odds stacked against them, as communities where resilience isn't a speech, it's a daily ritual. She didn't plead for funding like it was charity. She called it what it was, a debt, a long overdue debt. And the way she spoke about those people, her people, wasn't political. It was sacred. She gave them names. She gave them voice. And in doing so, she reminded the room that the greatest tragedy isn't poverty, it's invisibility. That's what she was fighting. That's what she was tearing down. Not just JD Vance's argument, but the entire mindset that lets lawmakers sit in warm, well-lit rooms and debate broken lives like talking points. Because for Crockett, those names weren't props. They were proof. Proof that behind every line item cut from a budget, there's a story, a family, a child, a life that matters. And no senator, not even JD Vance, gets to reduce them to failures. Not without hearing their names first. Then, just when the room thought she was finished, she turned the lens, and the heat, back where it belonged. Her tone didn't shift, her voice didn't rise, but her words landed with a kind of quiet finality that doesn't beg for attention. It commands it. "You talk about urban mismanagement," she said, eyes still fixed on JD Vance. "But what about your own backyard?" There was no hesitation, no stammer, no room for retreat. She named names, counties, not theories. Chillicothe, Scioto, Ross. Not just dots on a map, but places with stories just as real and just as painful as those she'd already told. These weren't foreign places to Vance. They were his home turf, his responsibility, his reflection. And Crockett held up the mirror without flinching. She didn't generalize, she described. Families without plumbing, boiling water to wash dishes and bathe children in trailers barely holding together. Neighborhoods hollowed out by opioid addiction, where pharmacies have closed, but pill bottles still echo through the streets. Kids walking along roads with no sidewalks, dodging traffic just to reach a school bus that shows up when it feels like it. She didn't say these things to score a point. She said them because they're real. Because no amount of polished rhetoric can erase the fact that poverty is not a zip code problem. It's not urban or rural. It's not red or blue. It's what happens when the powerful ignore the powerless, no matter where they live. And then came the line that cracked the air open like thunder, even though she barely raised her voice. "They're not lazy," she said. "They're not broken. They're neglected by leaders like you." She didn't blink, and neither did the people in the back row, because everyone knew exactly what just happened. The accusation wasn't hidden anymore. It was out there, uncovered, undeniable. What JD Vance had tried to frame as a failed urban narrative had just been returned to him, rewritten, recentered, and pinned to his own record. This wasn't just about holding a mirror to a senator. It was about obliterating the lie that struggle only exists in cities, and that rural America somehow earns more sympathy simply by being whiter, quieter, and politically convenient. In that moment, Crockett didn't just defend her constituents. She stood up for his, and she showed the country the truth most lawmakers never want to admit, that the suffering they ignore isn't exclusive to one side. It's everywhere. And the difference between compassion and contempt isn't who's hurting, it's who gets blamed for it. Vance shifted, barely, just a flicker, a tap of his pen against the desk, a quick clearing of his throat that didn't quite land as confidence. It wasn't loud enough to catch attention, but it was just enough to betray the smallest crack. The kind of crack that shows when a man realizes he miscalculated the moment, when he thought he was walking into a debate, and instead walked into a reckoning. The air around him had changed. The room wasn't looking to him anymore. They were watching her, listening to her, measuring her words, not his authority. That's the moment every seasoned politician dreads. Not being yelled at, not being disagreed with, but being irrelevant. He tried to speak, tried to reel it back, maybe offer a counterpoint, maybe shift the tone to something more neutral, more comfortable. He had the beginnings of a sentence ready, something about complexity, about shared blame. But it didn't matter. Because Jasmine Crockett didn't raise her hand to interrupt. She didn't jump in or overtalk him. She didn't meet his attempt with noise. She dismantled. She took the foundation of his argument, the assumption that urban struggle is self-inflicted, and removed it brick by brick, not with volume, but with precision, not with anger, but with something far more lethal, truth layered with memory. She didn't let him walk the conversation back into safe territory. She walked straight into the part of the debate he didn't want aired, his record, his votes, his silence. And the more she spoke, the smaller he seemed, not because she humiliated him, but because she revealed him, stripped away the posture, the performance, the curated concern, left only the facts, the votes against housing programs, the rejection of rural assistance, the speeches about hard work and bootstrap theory, backed by no action for the people living paycheck to paycheck in his own districts. He came into that room believing he would be the one to ask the hard questions. But now he was the one being held to account, and not with rage, but with receipts. That's why he tapped his pen. That's why he cleared his throat. Because in that moment, JD Vance realized the power in the room had shifted, and no one had to say it out loud. The silence already had. "You asked about responsibility," she said, steady as stone, her voice low but unmistakably firm. "Let's talk voting records." There wasn't a hint of hesitation in her tone. No need to check notes. No need to soften the blow. She was ready. She had receipts, and she was going to read them out loud. "You voted against rural broadband," she continued. Her gaze didn't break. "Against heating assistance. Against housing vouchers that would have helped single mums in both Dallas and Dayton." She didn't blink when she said it, didn't flinch. Because these weren't just bills to her. These were lifelines he'd cut. "Don't tell me you care about poor families," she said, her voice narrowing like a spotlight, while blocking every bill that could help them. The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence was heavier than noise. It was the silence that comes when someone finally says the thing everyone else has been dancing around. The silence that makes spin impossible. But just when they thought she might stay in that rhythm, fact, statistic, indictment, she did something no one saw coming. She put the binder down, and in that single quiet gesture, she shifted the energy of the entire room. She wasn't done with the facts. But now she was about to give them something more dangerous. Not a policy critique, not a headline moment, a memory. She told her own story, not packaged, not polished, no script, just raw, aching truth that didn't ask for applause, didn't need permission, and didn't care if it made people uncomfortable. She didn't deliver it like a speech. She remembered it, right there in front of everyone. And the difference was felt immediately. Because suddenly, she wasn't just a congresswoman at a microphone. She was a 13-year-old girl standing in front of a house where everything she owned had been thrown out onto the lawn. She was a sister trying to keep her little brother calm while their parents searched for somewhere, anywhere, to sleep that night. She was a daughter watching her mother fold blankets in a stranger's living room, pretending it was all temporary, pretending it was all okay. She didn't cry. She didn't waver. She just told it exactly how it was. And the room, which had been full of posture and politics just minutes before, suddenly felt like a confessional. Like everyone forgot the cameras were there. Like all that mattered now was the truth coming out of her mouth. And that was the pivot, the real pivot. The moment when Crockett stopped being the woman defending her policies and became the woman defending millions of people who had lived versions of that same story. People who never got to tell it. People who were too busy surviving to speak it out loud. That's when the hearing changed. That's when it stopped being about who looked strong and who looked smart. That's when it became real. She didn't ease into it. She didn't build it up with drama or suspense. She just said it, plain, stripped, and honest. "I was 14 when we got evicted." The words came out quiet, but they carried like thunder in a room not built to hold that kind of truth. There was no political framing, no careful spin, just a girl's memory, dropped like a stone in a still lake. Her mother was working 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day, stocking shelves at night, doing everything right, everything expected, everything exhausting. Her father was recovering from surgery, barely able to move, much less work. They were behind on rent, not because they were reckless, but because life had cornered them and no one was coming to help. Then one morning, it happened. They came home from school and everything they owned was on the curb. Clothes, books, the TV, her brother's backpack, piled like it all meant nothing. "My little brother thought we were going on a trip," she said. And when those words left her mouth, something shifted in the room. She didn't cry. She didn't pause for effect. She just told it. He didn't know what eviction meant, but I did. And that's when the silence got heavy. Even JD Vance, who had been flipping through notes and planning his next move, stopped. He wasn't in control anymore. The room wasn't focused on sound bites or angles or who scored a point. They were listening, really listening. Not because they were supposed to, but because they couldn't look away. I remember the neighbours pretending not to see, she went on, her voice steady, almost matter of fact. I remember sleeping on a cousin's floor and still showing up to school like everything was fine. And the way she said, fine. You could tell it wasn't. Not then, not now. She spoke like someone who carried the memory not as a scar, but as a compass. The kind that doesn't let you forget where you came from. The kind that pulls you back to the truth when the world wants to rewrite it. And then she said the line that cut through the chamber like a blade. I remember learning how shame grows when no one speaks up for you. That was it. The moment that turned her from a politician into something more. Something real. Because in that instant, she wasn't just speaking for herself. She was speaking for every kid who's watched their life get thrown onto a sidewalk and been told to get over it. For every parent who worked themselves raw only to be met with notices, locks, and silence. For every neighbour who saw it happen and kept their head down because they didn't know what to say. That's why I ran for office, she said. Not for applause, not for a headline. But because someone needed to say these things in the rooms where decisions get made. Because someone had to remind the powerful that behind every budget cut is a couch on the curb. A little brother who thinks it's a vacation. A girl who learns too early how to pretend everything's okay. And when she said it, the room didn't just hear her. They felt her. Then she turned. Not to Vance, not to the panel, not even to the stack of papers in front of her. She turned to the lens, the cold, blinking red dot of the camera, like she knew exactly who was on the other side. And she did. She wasn't speaking to politicians anymore. She was speaking to the millions of people who've been told over and over again that their poverty was a personal failure. That if they just worked harder, prayed longer, complained less, they wouldn't be where they are. She looked into that camera the way someone looks into a mirror, like she was speaking from the inside out. This isn't about winning a debate, she said, not performing, not projecting, declaring. This is about people who haven't had a break in 10 years being told they just need to work harder. Her voice didn't shake, but it cracked something wide open. It's about pretending systemic neglect is a budgeting issue instead of what it really is, erasure. That word, erasure, hung in the air like smoke from a house that's still burning. She didn't need to explain it. Everyone who's ever stood in a welfare office waiting for hours just to be told they filled out the wrong form understood it. Everyone who's watched their child sleep in the back seat of a car while pretending it was a fun adventure understood it. Everyone who's been treated like an inconvenience instead of a human being felt it. And outside that room, the world caught fire. The clip didn't need edits. No dramatic music, no flashy graphics, just her voice, her eyes, and that one devastating truth landing without apology. TikTok lit up like it had just witnessed something sacred. Young people watching, mouths trembling, tears hanging in the corners of their eyes. Not because it was sad, but because it was theirs. It was what they've been waiting for someone to say for years. Twitter ignited next, one quote after another. Screenshots, subtitles, stitches, duets. Hashtags like JD Crockett Clapback and She Spoke For Us started to trend. But it wasn't just hype. It wasn't just performative reposting. People weren't sharing the clip because it was viral. They were sharing it because it was theirs. Because someone finally said out loud what they had only whispered to themselves behind closed doors. And they weren't just watching. They were remembering. They were remembering the eviction. The phone call that changed everything. The teacher who sent them home because their uniform had holes. The shame of asking for help and being told it's their fault for needing it in the first place. The long nights. The overdraft notices. The empty fridge. The silence after someone said, "You should have just worked harder." Jasmine Crockett didn't just break the moment. She broke the silence. They were remembering, and not in the comfortable way. Not in nostalgia. In the kind of remembering that tightens your throat and makes you stare at a wall because it's suddenly there again. That time they were evicted and had to carry their life in garbage bags, pretending it was temporary. That moment they hid their kids behind curtains during a landlord inspection, whispering for them not to move, not to breathe, because one wrong sound could mean being thrown out. That bitter winter when the heat gave out, and instead of breaking down, they smiled and told their kids it was just a camping night, because that's what love looks like when you're broke and still trying to protect your children's joy. These weren't headlines. These were lived moments. Moments people don't talk about at dinner parties. Moments that leave behind invisible bruises and teach you how to keep your head down even when you're screaming inside. Jasmine Crockett didn't just speak for Dallas that day. She didn't just speak for her district or her voters or even her generation. She spoke for anyone who's ever had to swallow their story because someone with a suit and a smirk decided they weren't worth listening to. She spoke for the woman who shows up to work exhausted from worry, for the father who skipped dinner so his daughter could eat, for the teenager who knows more about eviction laws than algebra, for the grandmother who nods and smiles politely at church, knowing her fridge is empty at home. She didn't carry their pain. She honoured it, gave it weight, gave it language, and in doing so, made it undeniable. And while the country buzzed with that truth, Vance's team scrambled. They did what politicians always do when they get caught flat-footed. They issued a statement. It hit his official site before sunset. A neat, forgettable sentence. We respect differing viewpoints and remain committed to bipartisan solutions. It was the kind of line that says nothing and hopes everyone forgets everything, but no one forgot. Because the comments said what the statement wouldn't dare. They filled the space with clarity. She had facts. You had a smirk. She brought names. You brought deflection. You came to win a point. She came to change the story. Vance had come in thinking he could shame a city. Crockett left having shown the whole country what shame really looks like, when power is used to ignore the powerless and then hides behind politeness when it's called out. Back in her office, the walls weren't lined with celebration. There were no champagne glasses, no triumphant playlist playing through the speakers. Just stacks of policy drafts, coffee rings on folders, and the same soft hum of fluorescent lights above. A staffer walked in, phone in hand, eyes wide. 2 million, they said. The video just passed 2 million. Crockett looked up from the bill she was editing, blinked once and nodded. No grin, no fist pump. Just a quiet, good. And then, as if that milestone were nothing more than a mile marker on a long road, she said, "Now let's finish the housing bill." Because she knew the difference. She knew that virality is loud, but it doesn't last. It burns hot, then moves on to the next spark. But visibility, that's different. Visibility stays. It changes the shape of things. It plants itself in rooms it was never allowed to enter before. That's what she was after. Not noise, not trending hashtags. Recognition for people who've been invisible for far too long. She wasn't thinking about views. She was thinking about Miss Clara, still boiling water to stay clean. About Elijah, still doing his geometry homework in the back seat of a parked car. About the quiet desperation of families across America who keep showing up, doing the work, enduring the silence, while lawmakers argue over their existence like a theoretical line item. The real win that day wasn't JD Vance going quiet. It wasn't that he didn't have a comeback. It wasn't even that he finally looked unsure. That was a moment, but it wasn't the moment. The real win was that for once, the microphone didn't belong to the same few names. For once, someone stepped into that room and didn't just speak for the unheard, but made them unignorable. She took every eviction notice, every long wait at the housing office, every moment someone was told they were the problem, and turned it into testimony. Not pity, not rage, but something sharper, something rooted, something unstoppable. And she reminded anyone watching that poverty doesn't make you voiceless. The system just refuses to listen. Until someone forces it to. She didn't come for revenge. She didn't come for claps. She came with facts and memories and a voice too steady to dismiss. And that's what made it so devastating. Because it wasn't political theatre. It was truth, delivered so plainly, it left no space to dodge. She didn't need to yell. She didn't need to insult. She just stood there, calm and unshaken, and told the kind of truth that makes people shift in their seats. Not because it's new, but because they can no longer pretend not to see it. So no, she didn't celebrate. She got back to work, because she knew that somewhere, right now, someone's watching that clip and realizing, maybe for the first time, that their story matters. That someone said it out loud, finally. That someone carried their silence into a room of power and shattered the walls with it. And that's the kind of clapback that doesn't just echo. It reverberates. It lingers in the halls. It rewrites who belongs. And long after the trending page moves on, people will remember the day someone like Jasmine Crockett stepped up, not just to speak, but to represent.